There are 47 proposals that she and her team have come up with, and of those, these are some of the key recommendations. Principally, that the UK government should create a new independent regulator, which should oversee financial regulation in football. They say that the Premier League should guarantee its support to the pyramid and make additional proportionate contributions to further support football, which may include a reform of the parachute payment system. They'd like to see more support from the Premier League to the pyramid through a solidarity transfer levy. That has been talked about as around 10% of all foreign transfers. The independent regulator should establish a new fit and proper persons test. Any existing owner should repass the test on a 3-year licensing review. They'd like to see fans more consulted on all key off-field decisions through a shadow board. And equality, diversity and inclusion plans should be mandatory for all clubs. Now, some of those you would think would be waved through by anybody that has an interest in football, but there are some which have caused a lot of discussion and debate already. Now, there was a Premier League meeting on Friday. We don't know the outcome of that. The EFL clubs, including Gary Neville, met today. So where do they stand on this, Gary? Are they in general supportive of the recommendations and I suppose principally of the idea now of an independent regulator?
Yeah, I think probably 95% of the EFL clubs, the National League clubs, fans within the sort of supporters federations are behind the fan-led review. It is what it says on the tin. It's a fan-led review. Born out of the stresses in football, obviously the sort of situation at Bury where Bury collapsed.
The European Super League was a real catalyst, wasn't it?
I think what's happened is
That's
I think that Bury was the forerunner for it, but I think people accepted that couldn't happen again. But I think what's happened in the last 18 months through COVID, the actions of the Premier League have accelerated this and I think brought out these recommendations and conclusions.
So why can't the stakeholders govern themselves?
I think that's been demonstrated for a long time, Dave, that the stakeholders, 5 of them, all doing very good jobs for their own individual parties, but there is no one really looking after the sort of interest of English football. Everybody, Premier League after the Premier League, they do pass a lot of money down through the system and through the pyramid. The EFL obviously are there to try and represent the EFL. The FA, I think, a bit of a. They're in a situation, they're not really got any power. I know they say they do. They're the governing body of this football in this country, but they're not. The Premier League control the power in this country. The PFA obviously protect the players and the managers protect the managers. And I think what we've seen over the last 18 months are some pretty unfortunate and unacceptable actions that mean that English football just needs that independence and transparency that it doesn't currently have.
There is obviously a big push for a redistribution of the Premier League's wealth. The EFL, the National League, want a bigger slice of it. The Premier League clubs would say, and we've heard them say over the last few days, that they're already paying out 1.6 billion guaranteed over the next 3 years. Is that not enough?
I don't want to get caught up on is 1.6 billion enough. I think the parachute payments do create a bit of an issue, but I don't think it's right that the bottom of the Premier League get 100 million and the top of the Championship get probably 95, 93, 94 million less. I think that's too big a gap. I think that gap should be shorter. I think when you're in the Premier League, and I was in the Premier League for 20 years at Manchester United, you're in a bubble and you don't see the world from everywhere else. But when you step outside of it and you go and have a non-league club and then you go and experience League Two and you go and see it from a different perspective, I think you do feel that the actual distribution of wealth is unfair. It needs modifying. I wouldn't do anything that would ever damage the competitiveness or the brilliance of the Premier League. I said last week, I think that the number one job of an independent regulator should be to protect the quality that we have in the Premier League. I think that can be done whilst also distributing more wealth, introducing sustainability measures, making sure that there's better diversity and inclusion within the game, making sure there's a more robust fit and proper persons test so that Bury can't happen, making sure that the ongoing licensing system, which means that obviously owners have to make sure that they abide by what would be rules and they don't sort of, if you like, mishandle and mistreat clubs, real-time monitoring and financial tracking so that ultimately clubs can't get into the situation that Derby have got into or that Bury have got into or that other clubs have got into. I think it's just football clubs are too important to not have better governance and more independence and more transparency. And I think that referring to football clubs as corner shops, saying the argument that Tesco's don't give handouts to corner shops, it's really disrespectful to football clubs to suggest that we know how important the corner shop can be in a local community, but Sunderland is not just a corner shop. I mean, let's be clear. You know, Bristol City or Bristol Rovers in Bristol are not corner shops. They're institutions in the city that are absolutely unbelievably important. They are heritage assets, football clubs, that actually people sort of, you know, live their lives for every single week. So for me, I think it's a great opportunity, this, to reset English football. I would have hoped, and it hasn't happened, that the Premier League would have engaged, that you would have seen this as an opportunity to come to the table, to really reset English football and just tweak it slightly. We're not looking, you know, it's not a case of, I think, you know, there's going to be another 5 billion coming down to the EFL or the National League. That's not going to happen. You're not talking stupid numbers here. You're just talking a little bit more generosity, a little bit more governance. There needs to be controls in place with any money that's sent down. So I don't like the idea of money being sent down to the EFL and then the same problems occurring again. They need to be sent down with some conditions and some control. So I'm not one of those people who sits there and says, just give the pyramid more money.
What would those conditions be? Obviously, you're in that league, you're an owner in that league. What do you think those conditions would be fair? And where do you think the money should come from? Should it be the parachute payments should be spread a lot more around football rather than those teams that just come down, or a levy on transfer fees? These are the things that are being mentioned. Where do you think that financial money should come from, and what rules should be in place?
The money's all controlled by the Premier League, so the money all goes into one pot. So ultimately, at this moment in time, it's for them to determine what gets passed down through the league. I think that you talk about a transfer levy, you talk about the redistribution of wealth, you talk about parachute payments. I do think the parachute payments create a stress that doesn't need to occur. That desperation of going down should bring sporting disappointment. It shouldn't bring oblivion. It shouldn't make people feel that desperate, either to go up or to come down. It should be desperation from a sporting point of view, but not from an economic point of view. So I think that ultimately, whether it's a transfer levy, whether it's redistribution of wealth, whether it's a redistribution or reform of the parachute payments, there needs to be a new package that exists from the Premier League through the pyramid that not just, if you like, hands more money down the pyramid than already occurs, but also means that it comes with some conditions like sustainability, like fit and proper owners tests, like real-time financial monitoring, like where clubs want to invest more than their revenue, that the owners are good for it, and that they put the money up through a bank guarantee or a bond. You're not talking about rocket science. You're not talking about rocket science. I think in the last couple of weeks, I hoped when Tracy Crouch's recommendations came out, I hoped that whatever the outcome was, that football would come together behind it. What seems to have happened is the EFL obviously have supported the recommendations. The FA and the Premier League have actually said that they don't support them, and there've been some quite sort of hostile language from some Premier League owners.
The suggestion from the Premier League seems to be that there's no rush in this. They are taking their time to review what has been reported and also work through the unintended outcomes that might be hidden in there.
No. So there is no unintended consequence of this report. They were really intelligent football people from all parts of the game and government.
But you recognise the opposition?
Who built... I also recognise the opposition. But you can't say that panel with journalists, fans, EFL representation, Premier League representation, ex-player representation have not done a thorough piece of work and come to the conclusions with unintended consequences. They knew exactly what they were writing. It's quite, to be fair, ignorant and arrogant to suggest that there's people within that panel have created unintended consequences.
Well, let me put some of those points to you then, because we've heard from a few figures from the Premier League over the last weekend. Christian Purslow, the Aston Villa chief executive, has raised the point about the danger of killing the golden goose if we overregulate a highly successful financial and commercial operation. Could there be a danger that by putting more regulation on the Premier League clubs, you actually unintendedly have less money going down the pyramid?
I think the smart thing for the Premier League to, at this moment in time, would probably to ask their representatives to stop doing interviews, because they're actually not helping their own cause. I mean, Christian Purslow and... Well,
Angus Kinnear, this is a different point. I mean, there were some headline makers in what they were saying in Angus Kinnear, the Leeds chief executive's programme notes. But he did say this: the redistribution of wealth will simply favour the lowest common denominator. Clubs who excel in recruitment, player development or commercial enterprise will be punished, while less capable ownership will be rewarded for incompetence. What would you say to that?
I just thought Leeds United, as an ownership, as a sort of executive management team, would have understood the feeling of economic distress and desperation by being in the Championship that they were for so long. And look, what I hope is that some of the top clubs in the country, like Manchester United and Liverpool, I've always thought that they should really be the guardians of English football, the most historic clubs, the ones that, to be fair, have the most success. They've got the biggest money and the most revenues. They should really be sat there, sort of what would be reining in some of these comments and coming out and saying, look, they don't have to say that they're in support of it, but they don't have to come out with comments like communism and Maoism and other such things. What I do believe should happen is that they should engage and come to the table and basically look at the proposals. And there isn't, I don't think, that much to fear. I really don't think there is that much to fear here. It's a really thorough piece of work by a good group of people who've put together recommendations that I think will reset English football for the good in the future. And I think to suggest that, you know, the golden goose will be killed or that this is a sort of emulates communism isn't right, and I don't think it helps their cause, particularly with their actions in the last 12 to 18 months with Big Picture and Super League, which I think are still very sore in the minds of many fans.
You know, we're talking about those things that have happened over the last couple of years. Has that not told us, and what we're seeing right now, that we will never get football together in terms of all the clubs coming together? So whether it was Project Big Picture, COVID, the league stopping, remember that we were talking about teams maybe going down, or Liverpool with the league, all these different things that have happened. Everybody votes for themselves, don't they, and thinks about themselves. Are we being naive to think that the football pyramids will ever come together?
But there's no independence.
So is that why you need independence?
Yeah, honestly, I genuinely think that the football authorities know what good is. I think the Premier League know what good is. They know what they want to do for the game. They want to give good to the game. The EFL know that they want to protect their clubs. The players want to do well. We know we've been players. We know that the players want to look after the fans. They want to have a good relationship with the fans. The managers are the same. So everybody within there, and the FA do a very good job in the last few years with the England football team, with trying to do the very best they can with tight budgets for the grassroots football. But I think that at the pinch points, and usually they're economic pinch points, you just need independence to bang their heads together and get a deal done, which, to be fair, is fair to everybody. At the moment, the Premier League, which is run by 20 clubs, even though there have been 50 clubs representing the Premier League. The Premier League club is not a franchise league. It's been 50 clubs have played in the Premier League over the last, whatever it is, 20, 30 years. So Sunderland, for instance, they're now a club that you support, Dave. They are now in League One. Manchester City have been in League One. You know, they've seen what it's like down there. They should, at this moment in time, clubs like Manchester City or other clubs that have been in those positions should look at it and think, yeah, I think we can come up with a better deal for football, more sustainability, stop Bury happening again. We can have real-time monitoring. We can make sure controls are in place. We can be more diverse and inclusive. We can have more regulation and make sure that the game's fairer. We can make the FA a little bit more powerful. Who's to say that this independent regulator doesn't empower the FA over the next few years to give them the proper powers that are needed to govern the game properly? The FA don't govern the game in this country, let's be clear. We say it's the governing body. It's not. The game is run by Roman Abramovich, the Glazer family, Daniel Levy.
They still need 14 votes.
They do, but the 6 are struggling with the 14 at times, and the 14 are struggling with the 6, if they were being really honest. There is even division within the Premier League. You've got to remember, 6 Premier League clubs were scheming behind the other 14 members' backs for months, trying to build their own league where basically they weren't going to allow the other 14 in. Then there was the big picture one where, again, 2 or 3 clubs at the top were scheming again behind the executive of the Premier League and the other clubs in the league. The Premier League can't control their own clubs. So to suggest that there doesn't need to be some independence and some control, come on.
We've heard a lot about the independent regulator. It's been talked about by you for a year or more.
Before,
and now
before Super League and before Big Picture.
Yeah, and now Tracy Crouch is putting it front and centre. We don't really know what it looks like. What is it? Is it one person? Is it a body of people? Who are they?
Sky are monitored by an independent regulator. Does it affect your job? Does it affect Sky's profits? Does it affect the way in which
tonight.
Well, it just means I have to keep you in check every week.
To be fair, I'm not using my phone after tomorrow. No, Dave, on a serious note, you know, ultimately, many industries in this country are governed by regulation. Gaming, energy.
Can I interrupt you there? When you talk about sort of Sky and other companies, the energy companies and all this, football is completely different. There's tribalism, the support. You only need to find out who the independent regulator supports. Can you imagine social media or the press? Do you understand what I mean? Does football not feel a bit different? I'm not saying there shouldn't be one, but when you're talking about the energy, or Sky, or big companies? Is football almost that sort of tribal and everyone's got a link, or they know somebody?
Look, if you saw the banking sector or financial sector pre the crash 2007, 2008, where basically banks were just lending 110% mortgages and there was a worldwide crisis, regulation was brought in this country after that to stop things like that happening again, and it was strengthened the sort of independence in the sort of banking sector for the better. I think that we've got a fantastic game in this country, but I do genuinely believe there needs to be a level of independence at the top. Football is probably one of the most important industries in this country, one of the most important things that we transport around the world. And at this moment in time, we could, I know it got stopped, but our top 6 clubs could have run away and left us 6 months ago and left this game in disarray, and left the game not just in this country in disarray, but in Belgium and Holland and other countries. They've tried it once, they tried it with big picture, that's twice. Perez and they're all over in Spain are still saying that the Super League's going to come back. Honestly, now is the time for an opportunity for the Premier League and their clubs to engage for a fairer system for all. But actually, the last thing any of us want is a Premier League that's damaged by any regulation. That will not happen.
Do you think the consequence?
Who chooses? Who would choose it? So you're talking about so many
Gary
different bodies. I think you might as well say do it. Well, you've got the Premier League, the EFL, the FA, all these different people who the independent regulator would affect.
Presumably they'd be appointed by the government.
I suspect what the government will do will appoint some sort of barrister or judge who will then basically recommend a panel to be set up. I suspect that's what will happen. So there's a level of independence in setting it up, and people will say, well, OK, I'll answer to government. And what the Premier League will do here, I know you said before that they were waiting to see what happened. The Premier League had a meeting on Friday. They've gone very quiet since that meeting. I think quiet is dangerous. Because the reality is what I was expecting off that meeting on Friday, that they would just say that they would start to engage. Now, my view on it is quite simply, they won't. They'll try and frustrate, they'll put legal teams on it, they'll try and knock it down the road, they'll try and kick it into the next parliament, they'll try and make sure that basically they work behind the scenes to get rid of it.
Or might they come to the table? We're talking about... I think I heard Tracy Crouch saying it was going to be 2023 before this
they'll probably come to the table.
So could they come to the table and try and cut some of this off by making deals with the EFL?
No, I suspect there's no doubt they'll try and do deals. There's no doubt, and that would be the right thing to do, but they'll also try and kick it down the road, lock it down in procedure and protocol and legal fights and procedure. I've absolutely no doubt about that. But to me, that just feels like the wrong approach. There has to be some consequence out of what's happened to football in the last 2 or 3 years. You know, the football, if you look at what's happened in terms of sort of the big picture, the European Super League, the distress that's caused at Derby and Bury and Oldham and Macclesfield and Wigan, all these clubs, there is something fundamentally wrong with the game. There's a lack of control, but that needs to be put in place. There does need to be a better distribution of the game. There needs to be a more robust, fit and proper persons test for owners. That probably could happen in the next 12 months. I've no doubt the Premier League will try and put deals in place, but that wouldn't stop the requirement for independence at the top of our national sport. We need independence. Honestly, we do. I would not ask for this. I've seen football from all sides. The wonder of the Premier League. I've worked for the FA for 4 years. I've had a non-league club. I'm sat in EFL meetings. I've been a player. I've been a PFA management committee member. I've been a coach. I love all aspects of the game, and I'm a fan. I'm a fan. I would not be asking for this if I didn't see the game from all sides. The last thing I want is Manchester United to be in a position where they can't compete with Real Madrid, or our top teams not to be able to compete with Real Madrid and Barcelona. It's the last thing I want to see, or the Premier League be diminished in quality. But I also want to see sustainability run through the whole of the league. I want to see a better distribution model. I want to see an empowered FA that means they can govern this game properly in the country without having the Premier League on top of their heads like that. I want to see players being able to do what they do and express themselves. I want coaches to be rewarded. I want the best international players to come up. I want diversity and inclusion. This can be achieved, but the game has not shown us so far that it can come together and act as one, particularly in moments of stress. And this report is a brilliant piece of work that's been carried out by high-quality people who love football, and we should endorse it as a game. Why fight against it just because it doesn't suit our own need? Some of the reactions from the Premier League owners or executive in the last few weeks have been terrible.